Shashi, such an honor and a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You have been an inspiration to so many people. I had the pleasure of meeting and working with you almost 10 years now, and I still cherish those moments.
Thank you.
Both in Napa Valley and in Mohonk in New York. I want to touch base now because the conference talks about the opportunities for U.S. companies in India. We talked about the world being flat, and we evolved from there to look at how we all can coexist with the emerging technologies. We talk about artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. Where do you think India's strength lies when it comes to labor force for the next wave?
Well, the strength lies in numbers. Right now, 50.1% of our population is under 25, 65% is under 35. The International Labour Organization, ILO, says that in 2020, we'll have something like 116 million people of the job starting age group of 19 to 23, at a time when even China will be down to just 93 million. So we are potentially the country with the demographic advantage to beat all demographic advantages. That is, with a critical mass of young, dynamic, working age people who could be the engine for the world economy if other things were right. And that's the key challenge, because this demographic dividend we're all anticipating can only be a dividend, indeed can only avoid being a demographic disaster, if we get it right in terms of educating, training, and skilling these young people so they're able to take advantage of the opportunities that the 21st century might offer them. That remains a challenge we have not yet been able to fulfill. We have diagnosed the problem, but if you look around, the actual performance on skill development has been extremely disappointing in the 3 years of the present government, which is why I believe the skill development minister has just been replaced. The private sector has comprehensively failed to step up to the plate. I expected that a lot of private sector enterprises would emphasize skill development amongst their priorities. The government's CSR policy, which requires every company of a certain size to spend 2% of its net profits on corporate social responsibility, that could have been spent on vocational training, skilling people, some of whom would have been available for these very companies to hire. But somehow companies have shown a lack of long-range thinking and have not invested sufficiently in skill development. So this remains my big worry. It's a fabulous opportunity which is not being sufficiently seized yet. And to my mind, either we seize it, in which case we have, within a few years, the workforce to beat all workforces around the world, available to do pretty much everything they've been trained and skilled to do. And if we lose it, then we have a whole lot of underemployed, undercooked, unready young people who are not able to step up and take the opportunities that a 21st century economy will offer them.
I want to scratch the surface a little deeper. No better person than you to ask this. When students come from India, and we are sitting here at the Haas School at Berkeley, when students come not only from IITs, but from other good schools in India, they do so well here. And you have seen the progress coming here as students, becoming good professionals, and then becoming entrepreneurs, and then now investing in companies. If you go on Sand Hill Road now, there is not a single venture capital company doesn't have, I think, an Indian face. 20 years ago, it wasn't the case. So why do you think we do so well coming here and not do so well in India?
Well, there are two answers to that. The first is, of course, that you already get the cream of the crop. You have to be a very bright student to get admitted in the West, and particularly in America. You have to be smart enough to qualify, to get visas, all of that. People who then leave their homes and families and come to a foreign country are also more motivated, more driven than people who are in their own familiar comforts of the home environment. So you have an extra element, the sort of immigrant zeal that we often hear about. But there is a third factor, which is that our systems at home have not done enough to encourage, in my view, the kind of entrepreneurial spirit. That's changing, but it's not changing fast enough. I remember giving an interview in 1990, which got me into a bit of controversy, where I said that having seen the world, it strikes me that the only place in the world where Indians are not successful is India, and that the reason for that has to lie in India itself and not in Indians. And I blame the system for the way in which it kept people down. Now, a lot of the problems that I identified then and in my writings around the 90s have been lifted with the liberalization of 1991 and the subsequent reforms. But somehow it's not there yet, and maybe it's partly because culturally we've been a safe or a play it safe kind of nation. Government service has been privileged over private sector, and within the private sector, salaried, pensionable jobs get privileges over entrepreneurial risk-taking, and that cultural thing also has to be overcome. When Indians come abroad, they've cut off their anchorage, they've cut off their moorings, and they're willing to take more risks, it seems. But you're quite right, they've done exceptionally well. I think the highest median income of any ethnic group in the US is that of the Indian American community. So I would like to think that we can do back in India what is being done here, and perhaps one of the injecting elements there could be Indian Americans perhaps coming back, even if only temporarily coming back, to help spark off or catalyze the same sort of efforts in India.
Shashi, the other important aspect for preparing the next generation is on strategic leadership, not just in government and political, but also in terms of corporations, because we are dealing at many different levels. As a rising superpower, China, Russia, and the West, of course. And when I look at strategic leadership, I think of you and your alma mater, Tufts. My nephew just graduated from there as a doctor, so every time I hear Tufts, I think of you. How do you think we can prepare the next generation in those things? Because I see a lot of capitalism being infused in India, and because people are not used to that, they are forgetting the real deep-rooted values. And who better than India to inculcate those values? So somehow we are discarding that and trying to just ape whatever is wrong in the West.
Well said, Martin. In fact, the ethical challenge is an extremely important one. First of all, on the leadership question, of course, you can train leaders to some degree. Though I have some sympathy with the idea that good leaders are often born, not made, they are also made out of their own experiences, and some of those experiences can be imparted by training. So good management programs, MBA programs are an important factor. But having said that, the ethical dimension is often neglected. That should not be neglected, because one of the great challenges in any newly entrepreneurial economy, the Chinese have discovered this too, is the risk of corruption, of malfeasance, of cheating the public and so on, which of course discredits the entire system. In the case of China, they've had to deal with a rather mammoth problem. In the case of India, we've had only one world-class scandal, the Satyam scandal, which fortunately was dealt with very swiftly, very efficiently. But bearing ethical considerations in mind is extremely important in a society like India. Equally, I would argue that you can't speak of strategic leadership without having an eye on society as a whole. And our society has a tremendous challenge still. We have 250 million people living below the poverty line, and ours is not the UN World Bank poverty line of $1.25 a day. That would be a higher percentage. These are people living below a poverty line that's been drawn barely this side of the funeral pyre. So it's a very serious challenge. And I think people who go into business to growing the economy have to understand that whether we grow at 6% as we're doing now, or 9% as we used to not so long ago, that ultimately what matters is that 25% at the bottom of our economy, that they need also to be in the minds of people who are in the business sector. If collectively we can attend to our bottom line, that is the bottom line that matters to the shareholders, but also think in terms of the famous triple bottom line, where what affects society, what affects sustainability and the environment, all that is also borne in mind, then it seems to me we can be far more effective, far more successful than if we were to merely be looking at the profit margins.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you. Good talking to you, Martin.